Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And for once in a garment meeting, one can genuinely say ladies and gentlemen because there are three ladies in the room. So four. So welcome to the fourth and the last edition of our Thinking Out of the Box. And I know some of you all have come to the earlier session, so it could be a bit of a repetition, but I thought I would just repeat the concept of thinking out of the box. What our whole idea was that we should uplift the normal buying and selling meeting point and also let the participants and the visitors go back with some additional knowledge, some innovative ideas, and frankly speaking, new ideas can only come if you start thinking outside the four walls of the box that you are normally used to. And that's why we came up with this idea of thinking out of the box. And of course, the knowledge partners are Wazir advisors whose business it is to think out of the box. So I guess we couldn't have had a better guide to our initiative. Today's session, actually when Varun from Wazir Advisors suggested the topic, I was a little perplexed because there seemed to be a queer mixture of sourcing and technology. And I did question as to how are the two topics related. And his answer was quite interesting, again, thinking out of the box. So what he said was that, Rahul bhai, the sourcing in the traditional methodology, that is you go to a vendor, see their samples, say अच्छा this अच्छा लगता है, ये अच्छा नहीं लगता है, चलो ये order place कर लो, मुझे 100 चाहिए, 200 चाहिए. And these are all decisions which are taken ad hoc, gut feeling. कौन सा सैंपल लेना है, कितना क्वांटिटी लेना है, सारी चीज़ एकदम it was a very subjective decision. And when you say new methods of sourcing, new ideas in sourcing, you cannot do that unless you use modern technology, whether it is in terms of MIS, whether it is in terms of the analysis of product performance in the past, your future expectations and estimations. So therefore, there is a very close link between modern sourcing and modern technology. So that's when I agreed. I said, yes, let's try and have that. And we have some excellent panel of speakers. Unfortunately, we had, it resembled the first innings of the Indian cricket team, where wickets would keep falling every over or every two balls. So we've had two very last minute and unexpected dropouts. So otherwise we had a panel of four. But I think we've been fortunate that the two remaining batsmen are like Rahul Dravid and Sachin Tendulkar. So I think we can be assured of an extremely interesting and thought-provoking session. So may I request Varun Vaid, who's one of the brightest sparks of Wazir Advisors. Like every organization, the top bosses are only there to earn the credits. The real work is being done by the people just below that. So Varun, I think, is the real brain behind Wazir Advisors. So may I request Varun, if you could come and then also introduce your panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul bhai. Good morning to everyone. So I'd like to introduce the panel members that we have. First of all, Sandeep Raghuvanshi. If you can please come up, Sandeep. Yeah. So he's the founder and CEO of Silai. He has a total experience of more than 20 years in not only in Indian or let's say Asian markets, but Middle East, African and European markets. And before actually the entrepreneurship bug bit him, he was a merger and acquisition specialist in EMEA region. He has worked as an investment banker, and his last profile as in corporate was working in strategic acquisition division of a $500 million FMCG firm, right? So welcome, Sandeep, and we are very much keen to understand what are your perception, what is the new offering that your company is having, and what is the concept behind it, and how the industry can really take benefit from that. So that's our first panel member. Second is we have Sonil Jain. Sonil, if you can just please come up. So he's the founder and CEO of Sotex. So Sotex started in 2017-18. In a short span of time, they have already created a presence in 5 countries, physical presence in also in Dubai, in India and Bangladesh. As of now, they are having more than 20,000 users. Yeah. So that's a good achievement, and considering that 2 years were kind of lost with all the pandemic situation, etc. So that is there. So he also has almost 2 decades of experience in fashion and textile industry in a lot of roles: sales, marketing, manufacturing, exports, retail, e-com. So I'm running out of the space. So he has done all what has to be done for this thing. So after that, again, he has taken up this initiative. His main focus of work has been the challenges for MSME. So that is one interesting thing we have been always been talking about. As an industry, if we talk about India, so we talk about larger companies, we talk about exports as a focus. But the real issue is we need a lot of initiatives on these for the small and medium sector enterprises. So this is something that we would be very, very interesting to hear from you, Sonil. So how the format is going to be is that we will have a small presentation from both of the panelists. Once they're done with the presentation, and then we can have some of the questions. I have some things to ask to them, and then after we are done, we will throw the floor open for some question answers for maybe 5-10 minutes. So that is going to be the format. We'll keep it interactive. So if there is some real question during the panel discussion also that you think is relevant, please feel free to ask that. So maybe what we can do is we can begin with Sonil, your presentation. Yeah. Okay, Sonil. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to Rahul and CMI team for having us here. So I want to just start off with the small presentation around the SME area. As Rahul Bhai also just pointed out with his start of the conversation, that sourcing and digital side of the story is something which is the current need of the hour. Is one of the industries which has not actually really taken the node of digitization, though we are in a digital world altogether, and we see that a lot of companies around, a lot of industries around us have actually taken up technology, they have intake the technology, they have taken up the roadmaps, and they have kind of scaled up very fast, and things have been very different. But when it comes to the textile as the ecosystem, we're still very fragmented. So what we as a digital model, what we're bringing together is the concept of the digital textile ecosystem, where we bring in the buyers, manufacturers, mills, materials, and allied services all under one single connection, where the connection is just on your screens. The phone is now the business that we all work on. So how that can be taken up and how that connection can be built up faster. So I want to just take it down. Is it not anything? Yeah, it's not just moving. Yep, it's going. Thanks. So as a textile and fashion ecosystem, it is broken into 3 areas. I mean, when I say broken, it is actually spread into 3 areas: retail, manufacturing, and supply chain. And all are kind of interrelated. So the manufacturer happens to be the middle part of the ecosystem, where he's connecting, he's bringing in the materials, the retail side, whether it is for the brand or for the export market. If we see this complete ecosystem at a global level, it's $3 trillion. At Asia level is about 900. At Asia itself is about $900 billion. It's actually helping how to. Yeah, it is changing.
It's changing. So what is happening is that. No, it is okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so at the global level, it's $3 trillion. And if we look at Asia, it's about $900 billion. Now, what we've seen in the last few years and decades, I would say, the transition of business in textile and fashion is all shifting towards Asia. And Asia, some of the countries on the screen, what you see are going to be the future countries who are actually going to be the textile sourcing or a fashion sourcing destinations, because of the shift from traditionally from the textile in the last 2 or 3 decades, the materials, the supply chain, everything has concentrated around this particular region. So what is important is the fact that how do we integrate this region together? Because if you see geographically, everything is in a proximity, yet it is still fragmented. The supply chain at a larger level is quite a fragmented site. Now, the entire thing starts from the manufacturer again. As I said, he's the one who's assembling all the materials, making the goods, and giving it to the retail side, which is going to the retail shelves of the story. The bigger part is the fact that the SMEs are the ones who have got the largest set of SMEs, who belongs to the majority of them are the SMEs in this sector. Average size ticket, when it comes to the INR side, it is about 25 to 50 crores at a global level, which is not too much, but this is how the thing is. But the main problem here is the manufacturer is the one who, like an example which you're taking of Mr. Simon or Baby Fashion, is the one who is highly unorganized, is always stuck with the challenges of sourcing, has limited use of technology because he cannot connect to the people outside the system, and then he is always struggling to grow his business. And some of the reasons why he struggles to grow his business is sometimes he's stuck in finding the new customers, other times he's getting the customers, but the development side of the product, because it's a fashion industry, you have to do the development faster, which is the need of the hour, and it's changing rapidly. Then it is anything which is unsold is part of his inventory. So that's another challenge, because it takes away his money and it gets blocked here. Then is the capacity imbalance issue. Sometimes he's got the high orders, too much of orders coming in. Other times he does not have the orders at all. So he's always struggling with meeting up his capacity. Third is he's not aware of the changing trends, what is happening in his own country, what is happening in the other regions and internationally. So whatever he has to produce, he has to be aware of what is the need of the customers. And last is there is no such specific training in the ecosystem which helps him to take care of all these issues. So what we have thought about is a digital model which actually helps the companies to integrate, to take away some of his challenges from this particular area by simply connecting him to the right set of knowledge. Now, this knowledge is basically digitizing some of the discovery part of the ecosystem. What it does for him is it helps him to improve the connectivity, gives him more business intelligence as to which is the right supplier for what products. If he has to go for a fabric, in the woven fabric, if he has to go for the linen fabric, and there are different kind of qualities, range, specifications, certifications required, which is the right person or the supplier he should go to. Apart from this, the access to the newer markets. If he has to sell, which are the newer markets, newer customers that he can approach to. The reduction is required in terms of the wastage of his resources, whether it is the products that he's already got in his system, materials, or the products that he's already made. The capacity issues, and then the time consumed which is required in the product development. Lastly, the opportunities in the ecosystem, how that can be discovered faster, and the working capital for growth. So we as a business model are working on this area wherein we not only bring some solutioning to some of these challenges, but also make it in a way that it is much more sustainable. Because if we do something and reinvent the wheel, but it is not with the current set of requirement, then it is like doing something on a model for next 5 to 10 years and then again understanding that this may not work. So we want to make something which is much more sustainable, where the things are faster, digital, yet the resource consumption becomes lower. So that's where the 3 areas we have picked up and we brought to the model. Now these are the things which we've got through a smart tools, where we've got a buyer-supplier set of connections, lead generation, profiling, surplus stock management, product development using technologies, 3D tools, 2D tools, and then the training and upskilling. All this we have integrated through a web and a mobile application put together. So what it helps, these tools help them to do is take care of some element of the stock by simply digitizing his warehouse and putting it to an open space where this warehouse can be seen by people or the buyers or fellow manufacturers. It brings a value to both the sides of the ecosystem. On the buyer side, it helps them to discover the things faster, the prices are cheaper because of the stock, and for the manufacturer or a supplier, if he's got that stock, it helps him to liquidate these things faster. Further, we have bring in the proposition of not only digitizing this thing, but making it more centric to a fact that how an end customer can see it. Picking up this side of the digital materials, making a 3D garments out of it and showcasing it to the customers. Once a customer says this color, this fabric, this silhouette is right, then go for the product development. So what it does for the ecosystem is it reduces the product development time, which is an average of 3 weeks. We bring this down to just 3 hours. So just simply by using the digital side of the story and making it with the technology, he is able to create the garments, give it to the customers, and bring it on. So it also increases the efficiency. It brings in the fast deliveries. Whatever materials are ready, the customers do not have to wait for the products for the materials to be ready, which is an average of 30 to 45 days when it comes to fabrics, color, dyeing, and everything. So whatever is ready in terms of the colors and everything, the things can be fast-tracked. This actually is a concept wherein we are talking about how to work on 30 days delivery, 45 days delivery, when the earlier times have been shortened up. So these are some of the areas where you can fast track this. I would just like to play one small video as to how this is actually integrating on the ecosystem on the digital side. I'm sorry, the music will not play, so I will just understand this. So it's basically bringing in the sourcing of various product lines across different categories, connecting them to the suppliers in the virtual ecosystem through an app where the traditional matrix is emails or WhatsApp to source. So it is basically putting on your requirements to one single dashboard, putting it with all your specification and sending it out. It reaches to the right set of suppliers based on the intelligence which has been added into the backend of the system. Keywords in terms of the fabrics, the quality, the parameters of sourcing that you require, and that information is going to various vendors at one go. So whosoever can be doing it, he can share the information faster. And then adding this with the backend support. Wherever the buyer gets stuck, the backend support can be given. Where the supplier gets stuck in terms of the backend support can actually do it. So it's more like a virtual sourcing manager, which helps you along with the technology, which is integrating it. So with this, the idea is that the value proposition for the users is much more higher. So what we have seen is from a traditional sourcing method of coming in a sourcing events and then waiting for the 6 months to get the new products coming in. These kind of methods fast tracks the sourcing. Whatever new products are coming in, you can go see it on a common website from various vendors. You can just put your search bars in terms of the products, in terms of the location, in terms of the quantities. So whatever you want to do it can give you the results faster. So the efficiency of turning around the things becomes much more faster. And that's what we brought onto the table, which is connecting the buyers and sellers at a faster level with all the traceability areas, the reduction in the price, development cost and everything. And we do this by also bringing and adding up some industry-specific consultants who help these manufacturers, the SMEs, whether it is from the manufacturing side or the textile side, to understand and take up these things faster note. So these are some of the areas that what we as a platform are working in. And I'm happy to take any other questions, should there be from the room on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonil. Really very issues that you're addressing definitely are some of the burning ones. So we'll come to the discussion part of it. We'll definitely have some more discussion around the fact. But let's have the other presentation by Sandeep. So Sandeep, if you would like to take up the presentation now.
Have you loaded that? Yeah, this is the latest one. Before you wanted to start? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So, thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk about these things. I would rather take my time to talk about when we hear a lot of this conversation about technology and adoption and whether it applies to our industry or not. And there's a lot of lament that we hear about the relatively slow adoption of several trends that we see in many other manufacturing industries, we see in various other supply chains. So I just want to talk about some of the primary drivers, how exactly to think about it. So I want to talk about a couple of frameworks that typically we'll take in terms of deciding what is applicable, what is not applicable, how do we go about that, at what pace should it go about it, right? So the first framework that I would like to talk about is in terms of what exactly comprises any industry and how exactly the application of any technology or new innovations that we talk about come into that industry. Any industry, essentially we know that all supply chains primarily comprise of three parallel supply chains which are interconnected at various levels. The first is the physical supply chain, which comprises of the movement of your materials, the goods, the transactions that happen in terms of the physical exchange of goods, etc. The second supply chain is the financial supply chain, where the transactions happen. So who pays, when the person pays, or the buyer pays, to who, and how exactly the entire movement of money happens. The third supply chain is the information supply chain, how the information moves in that supply chain. And information is that sort of intelligence which essentially drives the movement of the other two supply chains, the material supply chain and the financial supply chain. Now what we see is that this is a very old industry. This is perhaps one of the oldest industries in the world. And a lot of things have matured and they are done for various reasons. Some are done for very good reasons, some are done for legacy reasons, because that is how things have been. Now, what we have been seeing over last several years is that in terms of the physical movement, the material supply chain, if we talk about, this material supply chain is being driven by one primary factor, which is the FOB. How do I lower the cost of my FOB costs? Irrespective of how long the supply chain becomes, right? So if I can find a cheaper destination somewhere, even if that means a longer supply chain, in the end, is this something that is happening? There are various sectors that have matured at various levels. There are new innovations which are happening to take out some of the inefficiencies and so on. But this is one area where you have a continuous deflationary pressure. And this is a fact of life and everyone has to live with that. And how exactly do you make up for that is what everyone has to figure out. The financial supply chain is also something which has reasonably matured over many, many years, maybe hundreds of years. You have the payment terms, the credit terms, the cost of financing, the interest rates, etc. And this is also something which is part of the expectation of the industry. In both of these, what we see is that there is an opportunity, of course, to premiumize, but there is a lot of pressures which are there, which are part of the industry drivers. The third supply chain is the information supply chain, which has relatively remained more basic so far. It has primarily been the intelligence which is linked with the material supply chain and financial supply chain. But now what we see is that a lot more is coming. You are seeing continuous investments which are happening on the front end in terms of forecasting of the trends, the Instagram trends and all, and how exactly that intelligence can come in, how exactly that sort of flows back into the supply chain. The manufacturers are looking for more intelligence on forecasting their orders, on predicting the various kind of demands that might come to them. And as you see that most of the investments which are currently going, most of the capital flow that is going in the industry is towards the information supply chain. This is one of the areas that we also see is where the differentiation is being built by various players, by various ecosystems, by various clusters, by various countries. Who is able to provide this information better is the one who has the superior advantage now on the business, because the other two are reasonably sort of harmonized across the world. So that is sort of the first framework I just wanted to lay out. The second is that now we know this, we talk about various solutions which are presented in front of everyone. The question comes is, how do we make a decision? How does any decision in a corporate is made? Any decision that has to be made regarding the technology adoption has to follow the same principles as any other decision in a corporate is made. So if we were to simplify the entire decision matrix, let's say into a 2x2 matrix, there are two dimensions to it. One is a decision that is made because of my internal reasons. A decision I need to make because I need to expand my capacity. Decision I need to make is something that I do for my purely internal reasons. No one else has asked me, it is part of my plans. The second dimension is that I need to make certain decisions because this is the expectation. Do we have a charger for this? Apparently the battery is running low, yeah? Sorry about that. The second dimension that always comes out is that I make a decision because there is a demand that I need to take a decision. That demand could come in because of a regulatory perspective. That demand can come because my customers are demanding. That demand could come from various other stakeholders, be the primary stakeholders that directly impact me as a business, or secondary stakeholders who impact the primary stakeholders who impact me. So media could be one example. So that is sort of one dimension. The second dimension is the decision that is to be made for short term versus long term. What is it that has an implication for me in short term, and what is it that has an implication in long term? Both are very different, because what may work in short term may not necessarily work in long term. What works in long term may not necessarily be beneficial in the short term. So these are sort of two primary dimensions. Now, if we were to categorize any decision that we make within this 2x2 matrix, I would start from the first quadrant, which is the bottom left quadrant, which is my internal reasons and the short-term nature of the decision that I'm making. We call this dimension as the efficiency dimension. Most of the decisions that are made in this dimension, this particular quadrant, are the ones that are made because they have an efficiency benefit. So either it lowers the cost of what I'm manufacturing, or it brings more productivity. Whatever it is, it has a direct implication on my profitability in the short term. The second one, if you remember, so on the external dimension in the short term. So I have to make a certain decision in the short term, but it is driven by external forces. It's a regulatory driven decision. It's my customers have suddenly started asking for certain kind of things to be provided, for which I need to make a decision, I need to make an investment, and that is something which is part of my cost of doing business. That is what we call as the legitimacy dimension. So I am a legitimate business player in that particular ecosystem. The third one is on the top right. That is the external factors, but in the long term. This dimension we call as the vision dimension. This is what the vision of the industry is. This is where the industry is going. This is where all the actors of industry have to be aligned. When we look at it today, whether it's a buyer on the fashion side, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's further upstream in the industry, if everyone has to agree on something that what is the direction of this industry in the long term, that is what would be the vision dimension. We all have to be cognizant of that. This is what drives what is the fourth quadrant, which is on the top left, my internal decisions, but for long term. This quadrant we call in innovation, so that I am aligned with the vision of the industry that has to be achieved, but it is my internal investments. I may not necessarily have the benefits that might come to me in the short term level, in the short term horizon. So these are sort of the four quadrants that we look at, and any decision that is made as a business owner, we consciously or subconsciously always place it in one of these 4 quadrants. Whether a decision that I'm making, and that's what we see, for example, there's a lot of talk of sustainability in the industry, that there has to be more sustainability related investments and industry has to move in that direction. Depending on which part of the value chain it is, we see that different kind of investment decisions have been made. LED lights have been a no-brainer. Why? Because it's in the efficiency domain. So I make a decision immediately, it benefits me. I need to provide certain kind of reporting if I'm a larger company. I go into the legitimacy domain, I will invest in that, I will immediately get that part of it because it is something that helps me to stay in business. Vision quadrant is where you find mostly the larger industries that can afford to think 5 years, 10 years, 15, even 30, 50 years down the line. They are the ones who make those investments in the vision quadrant. Most of the other players have to align themselves what is the industry vision. Now that industry vision of course has many drivers. It has the regulatory drivers, it has the global drivers, the climate drivers, and all those drivers is what shape that particular vision. We all have to be cognizant of that. What is interesting, what is important is that all players have to be keenly aware of these 4 areas to prioritize whatever investments we are making. In fact, this is how the decisions are made. But the framework helps sometimes to structure thoughts around. So that's my second framework I wanted to talk about. The third, if we now go into this vision quadrant, because that is where, in fact, that is the true North Pole when we talk about an industry. There is, like any vision, there is a long-term aspect to it, there is the medium-term aspect to it, and there is the short-term aspect to it. In the long term, where is this industry heading? We all can reasonably agree that we are heading, all the supply chains are heading towards make on demand. We are talking about mass customization. We are talking about demand that is driving the rest of the industry, which is catering to it, right? Now this is where, if you see, all the incremental investments that are happening in the industry are pretty much heading in that particular direction. How can we forecast the demand at an individual level? When the industry goes, e-commerce, for example, is one of the drivers which come into it, right? So how can we take it to these smaller clusters and wherever they are, domestically or internationally, how does it become one market? And how exactly can the industry cater to a highly customized, very agile supply chain? The second comes in the medium term. Now in the medium term, what we are looking at is, and I think Sotex is one of the great examples, and we see a lot of other examples, is there's a lot of sunk cost in the industry because this is a very old industry. There are a lot of players and a lot of actors which have been as part of the ecosystem, some for good reasons, some for no good reasons. I hope there's no auditors around here, but if we pick due diligence as one of the, let's say, aspects of the industry, most of the due diligence, most of the players are aware that it doesn't really serve the purpose that it is intended to. There is a lot of prescriptive nature to it. There is a lot of procedural nature to it. There are a lot of questions asked, but there are very few solutions that are provided. But that is the cost, that is the sunk cost of the industry that exists, and it continues to remain there. The inspection is another one of the sunk costs. There are a lot of these sunk costs which are there primarily to try to cater to that information supply chain, which is currently not available. Otherwise, only through these sunk costs, right? The third is in the short term. In the short term, as these pressures continue to grow for the information supply chain and for the agility of the supply chain, the smaller orders perhaps, etc., there is a need for the third-party suppliers to come in and fill that particular gap in the short term. In the end, the industry has to internalize a lot of these aspects within themselves, but in the medium term, the skill sets are very different. In the short term, the skill sets are very different. The skill sets that are required from the tech perspective, the skills that are required from various other such services that are being provided are very different nature to what a pure manufacturing skill set is. And that is where the need and the sort of the relevance of the third-party providers start becoming more and more important. Is they are able to bring those skill sets and able to fill that particular need and demand. But from an industry perspective, of course, the decision goes as how can I internalize those services and how can I provide those services to the market? And I think this is one of the topics that we are also discussing, that when we talk about the SME segment, or let's say even a little larger, the primary differentiation now between a relatively smaller manufacturer and a larger manufacturer is on their ability to provide those extra services to the industry. It is not necessarily only fighting on the material and the financial supply chain, because there are enough third-party suppliers also which are available. The primary difference is that who is able to go beyond just the order taking and order fulfilling. There are certain companies, certain clusters also who go even in the logistics aspect of it. Except for the demand forecasting and finally collecting the money from the customers, they try to cater to everything else for that particular buyer. And they are able to win business not on manufacturing costs of it. They are primarily able to win their businesses on the other services that they provide. And this is where, in fact, what we see is the differentiation that lies. The beauty today, and I think the benefit that comes out today, is that a lot of this infrastructure to be able to provide those services exist. And what is needed is from third-party providers, but also those who can internalize it. But even though it's a different skill set, to be able to take benefit of that infrastructure that is available and to be able to provide those services to be at par, so that the size essentially becomes irrelevant at a certain extent. There is an economies of scale that definitely comes in, but it's not necessarily a hindrance to be able to provide those services that differentiates a larger provider from a smaller provider. So that is sort of this frameworks. I wanted to keep it short in interest of time. I do understand it's long days over here. So these were a couple of frameworks that I just wanted to talk about. Very briefly, if I just mention, there was a small introduction that was given about me. We are one of those scale providers. We are one of those third-party service providers that are trying to cater to those particular needs. What we see is that specifically focusing on the garment factory floors. When we look at any industry today, any manufacturer in the supply chain, we see there is a strong integration that has happened with their primary customer markets. And that integration has happened because of their ability to generate the data internally and also be able to integrate that data from their ecosystem. And what we see is that there are unique challenges because of which this has not really happened in this particular industry. When we look at primarily on the manufacturing side, the primary nature of industry is low tech. The asset base does not have the same kind of value that you will find in a lot of other industries. And that is one of the reasons why it has prevented a lot of these technologies that can actually be implemented to do automated data generation. We all hear about smart factories. We all hear about these Industry 4.0. The primary question that comes to our mind is it even applicable on me? Is it something that is possible at all in my factory? Is it something that actually can be used at all and at a cost that is affordable to me? The answers are that absolutely yes. The concept is something that remains relevant. What has to be found is that the means have to be found and innovated so that they actually cater to this industry's requirement. And this is exactly what our focus is. We manufacture our own sensors. The sensors can be deployed and convert any desk into a smart desk within less than 2 minutes. It connects through the cloud network, so there's no expectation at all of any IT systems that might be required in the factory floors. The electrical systems do not have to be touched. It draws the power from the same sources as that of the machine. And a lot of data generation that has to be automated, because that is the primary driver of a smart factory, that the data generation of the process has to be automated. I should be able to replicate the process that I have in a soft version, so that once I have my process and once I have my data, I essentially am running a digital replica of whatever my factory is, and then there are a lot more possibilities that come out. Because I can have ready access to the data, I can have the real-time access to not only the data, but I can also do a lot of planning on that particular data, right? So very, very quickly, in fact, this is something I can share more details later also, but it's modular. So if I want the information about how much is being loaded into my line, if I want to know exactly what is the velocity at which my lines are operating, if I want to know what is the efficiency of each operator, what is my non-productive time. Now, all these concepts are very well known to everyone in the industry. Industrial engineering is not to be taught to anyone. The primary challenge has been, how do I get this data automatically? Without anyone generating this data, without anyone actually writing this data. This is where sensors come into play. So to be able to to manufacture low-cost sensors that actually cater to this particular industry, so that every single needle movement can actually be tracked, this is something that we do. And each of those components that we look at, these can be modularly taken, so one can start small. You can start with as little as one line, at a cost that is super affordable, at a price of just giving one free tea to each operator per day. You should be able to have all the data available and to do all the analytics, and you should be able to convert your factory into a smart factory. Then you can have those through mobile apps, you can have the TV displays in the factory, you can have the dashboards, and you can have WhatsApp chatbot that can answer the same way that you ask questions to your production flow manager. The sensors are rugged. The sensors are designed for the industry. We know which kind of the labor force, what are the qualification levels, their fear of technology. It has to be super simple. They work on muscle memory. So it is something that should be part of their muscle memory rather than cognitive memory that they have to use for that. That applies also for the supervisors, for the quality controllers and all. The value chain wise, we have manufacturing in Chennai. So we manufacture sensors. We have our deployment partners and we have our own offices. We currently operate in Tirupur. We have started in Karur. So these are two clusters that we focus on right now. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Sandeep. Two of the key framework, these supply chains, what we are talking about, we have covered in this presentation. So before we get into really question and answer, so Sandeep, I'll stick to your presentation and then I'd like to understand a little bit more about the concept of Industry 4.0. Why I'm asking is that, so whenever we hear about Industry 4.0, some really future high-tech factories of the future come to our mind. So is it really kind of unapproachable thing, right? Is it a kind of a fantasy for Indian industry? Are we late in the game? So what is actually, if somebody uses the word smart factory, so a lot of things come to our mind. Phones can be smart, TV can be smart, and that has happened over a very fast pace. So can our industry be really smart? But when we say smart, what is actually meaning of smart? Is it really very high-end technology, a lot of investment, etc. is going on? Or it's some kind of some tweaking in the existing infrastructure with a bare minimum cost? What are your thoughts on that?
So thanks a lot, Varun. I think probably we should just ask, right, what is smart? What is the definition of smart? Who's a smart person? When we call anyone smart, what do we mean by smart? Smart is someone who can take a decision quickly and who's able to take intelligent decisions which are most of the time correct, right? That is what smart is. A factory, if the factory has to be smart, it doesn't necessarily have to have those robotic arms moving things around. That's not the only definition of smart. The fundamental, let's say, building block of a smart factory, in my mind, would be a factory that is able to take whatever inputs they are getting internally or externally, are able to process those very quickly, are able to take a decision very quickly. Now, since as we are looking at the overall supply chains, we are seeing that a lot of these inputs are coming in form of data. The orders from the external environment, they are coming in form of data. A lot of internal processes, they are coming in form of data. So the ability to take those decisions quickly also have to be data driven. So a smart factory is something that is able to integrate with the external environment in a manner that they can internalize that data. They have the ability to convert that input into a decision, and then perhaps some validation and external human interaction can come in. But increasingly, a lot of those decisions can be made automatically. And this is what is a smart factory. Now, from Industry 4.0 perspective also, I think the fundamental drivers remain the same. The fundamental drivers remain that I should be able to convert all the transactions into data as much as possible automatically. And transaction, when we say transaction, I mean every single aspect of a operation of a particular factory. So that could be every time materials are loaded, every time some components are bought, every time there is an error that happens, every time an operation is done, every time there is a decision made whether it's a pass or a fail in this particular aspect, or a shipment is made, or a packing is done. Every single transaction, this is information that is available, but it is not being converted into data. So the conversion of information into data has to become automated so that this data can be preserved and it can be used for this analysis, and it can be reconverted back to information at any point of time when it is required, and can be merged with other information to be able to make those decisions. This is absolutely doable. It does not necessarily have to be only robotic arms. It can be done in smarter and clever ways, which suits this particular industry. And any industry should be able to become smart industry.
So actually whenever we say smart factory, or the concept is not a smart factory, means actually smarter factory. The better way of doing whatever we are doing, that is the main concept. So we have spoken to so many smaller companies. So they always understand that the kind of investment, like Sandeep mentioned, that the expense of running investment in one line is providing a free cup of tea to the worker per day, right? So that's the kind of cost that we are going to incur. And even if on a trial basis, if we can do some of the lines, of course, it's a modular in nature, right? So that can be taken up a trial basis. So I like to encourage the audience also, if you want to have any understanding on the concepts or anything that comes to your mind. So please feel to ask rather than waiting to in the end while the ship has already sailed, we have moved into a different topic altogether. So please, if there is any question, please feel to ask. So that's the first thing. So one point is that we are making on the shop floor, we are making the decisions correct through a smarter decision. Coming to the material supply chain, the second supply chain framework is there. So before we understand the concept or talking specifically about your concept, what do you think, Sonal, are how over the last few years, and taking into consideration the impact of COVID years also, how do you think that the sourcing landscape has changed over the years, and what is going to be in next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
So, just adding on to the conversation on the data side of it. Yeah. So data becomes the your history, a history which you can work around with. अगर जब तक आपको ये नहीं पता है कि आपकी फैक्ट्री में क्या हुआ था, उसका डेटा अगर आपके पास एक प्रॉपर तरीके में नहीं है और उसको आप नहीं निकाल सकते, उसको आप यूज़ नहीं कर सकते, that's the area where the limitation of a SME owner comes in. And simply by putting that data into the organized way is the first level of doing things. Now this is an internal part of it. Now when it comes to external part of it, there is a data in terms of the buyer behavior, and then there is a data in terms of how the supplier is going to behave. The supplier and the buyer behavior is an external side of business which you don't control or you can't control. And if you start working with the data which is not with you, but it is available to you through a third medium, which is like knowing how efficient a supplier is in terms of his quality, in terms of his delivery, in terms of his ratings or engagement with the past customers. That's a kind of an area where the your decision making as a SME business owner becomes little faster. Similarly goes with when you are sitting on the manufacturing or a supplier side. The same kind of data when it comes to the buyer side, if his payment terms, his mindset of ordering or his behavior of ordering, what kind of fabrics is he using, what kind of materials he is using, what is the cycle that he uses that material in, what times, what quantities, what are the parameters he's adopting for buying. So these are again these questions of data, again putting it together and bringing it to a level wherein the smart factories or the smart tools, whether it comes to sourcing, if combined together gives a higher efficiency for any business model. Now this is the same thing which has happened in the other set of industries, but unfortunately not happened in the textile or the fashion ecosystem. If you see Make My Trip or hotel industry, Make My Trip and other disruptions happened, the same kind of data was there in the Uber model also. But that model was like taxis across in different cities, different states, every cluster के अंदर आपके पास taxi stand है. लेकिन how do you reach out to the guy and tell him that I want a taxi? What if the taxi is not available? Now that data approach is simply making that taxi available to you right on your door. You don't have to go out it. It is just the artificial intelligence, business intelligence, where the car is. It is getting connected to you. It is giving you the validity of driver, how far it is. So this is all again the data. So as you said, where the industry is heading. What we see is the fact that if this data can be put into an accurate framework, where not only the businesses can talk internally what is happening inside their ecosystem, but also see what is happening outside their ecosystem. कि आपके buyer के साथ, आपके supplier के साथ क्या challenges हैं, क्या उसकी requirements हैं, what is that he is working on, what are his USPs and strength. अगर ये data आपके पास आने शुरू हो जाए, तो आपका business cycle automatically increase होना शुरू हो जाएगा. And these are the models which have already been tried, tested into various other industries. It's just that this kind of disruption is just waiting to happen in this textile and fashion industry. What we are doing in the same show is coming back, meeting to the same set of suppliers after 3 months, 6 months, or maybe in certain cases after 2 years. What has happened in the last 2 years in his ecosystem, you may not be knowing. Unless you go to each and every stall, understand each and every product that he is there on the stall, that's technically not possible. You cannot spend that much kind of time. But the moment you are sitting on your seat and there is an order which comes in from the buyer and is saying कि मुझे ये वाला fabric चाहिए, ये वाले buttons चाहिए, ये वाले मेरे को चाहिए, उस time पे you cannot go through the pages and the catalogs to see which guy is going to serve it. So this is again set of data which is compiled into a simple formulations of putting it on the cloud, having it on the app. जब आपको चाहिए वो आपको मिल रहा है. You don't have to wait for it. So that's where I see the transition and disruption going on. And this is the need of the hour. We don't want to do the same matrix again and again. Again, if things have evolved, we have to use that matrix and come back to the fact that how I can improve faster.
So like you said that there are already disruptions happening in some other sectors, right?
Yeah.
Maybe automotive could be leading, or and every other sector would be doing the same thing. So textiles is a bit slow in uptake, at least in the South Asian sector. So would you agree with that, or are we at a rapid pace, or how is it?
So I would say that textile was one of the areas where I would say people were waiting कि things are working. चल रहा है, काम हो रहा है, कोई बात नहीं. It may happen in the phone sector, it may happen in the hotel sector, it may happen in pharmaceutical sector or a medicine sector. उन सब में हो सकता है लेकिन हमारे में नहीं हो सकता. हमारे पे वो touch and feel का ही concept है. No. The touch and feel model was eradicated 15 years back when Jabong, Mantra, Amazon, they came into the fashion side. So everybody thought who is going to buy the garments online. But now if you see the current matrix, 40% of the buying is happening online. It's not probably, the people sitting in the room may not be buying that much, but talk to a generation below you. All the millennials, all the kids, more than anybody else, you have more couriers from Amazon and Flipkart and Zomato coming into your houses that you ever know. So ये 5-10 साल पहले नहीं था. So it is just a matter of time when these kind of models come into our industry also, where you don't have to worry about, कौन सा supplier को जाके ढूंढे, इस supplier ने हमारा late कर दिया, how do we find out a new supplier for this button, for this. So all this is going to come up.
Yeah, but there is another interesting concept also. So there is something in the... Sorry. Yes, please, Rahul.
Yes.
Just responding to your point, Sunil.
Yes, sir.
There is a huge difference between a B2C and a B2B situation. Now, even today, no matter what technology Amazon applies or Flipkart applies, you have to agree that there is at least a 30 to 35% return of goods due to the customer not being satisfied. Now that is one shirt which he returned, one lady's dress or top that he returned. That's fine. Can you imagine placing an order of thousands of meters or lakhs of meters without touch and feel, and then wanting to or realizing that this is not the right kind of product that I wanted to order? So I still believe, I don't fully agree with you that touch and feel is not going to be so important in the coming years.
So just to add up to this point, so what we are saying is touch and feel is important at a B2B level, not maybe at a B2C level, but the thing is कि how do we fast track this? The touch and feel, see अगर chiffon है तो chiffon का हमें पता ही है. अगर उसका GSM, if I am a buyer of a chiffon, I know if there is let's say 75 GSM का मुझे कपड़ा चाहिए तो वही चाहिए मुझे. Now it comes from factory A, B, C, D, that is immaterial. For me, what is important is the price and the delivery. So the ecosystem, when it comes to data-centric thing, it gives you an option whether a supplier B is as good as supplier A. So there are things like certifications, there are things like reviews, ratings, the same concept. हमें reinvent नहीं करना है. The only thing is the buyer is actually certifying, yes, the supplier is good. I have had a good experience of working with him. It can be 1, 2, 5, 10 or maybe 100 comments. If you start getting into this comment, the only thing is first you have a confidence of working with a supplier. And the first thing is once you are discovering it, out of 5 or 10 or 50 or 500, if you have to discover 5 or 10 suppliers, it is just fast tracking the system. So data is just enabler of getting into this equation at a faster level. Once that comes into you, physical exchange of samples can happen, ordering can come. When you have to pay money to a supplier sitting in Tripur or in Erode, the only thing is आपको या तो पहले जाना पड़ता था या आप कहते थे नहीं यार मैं नहीं पैसे दे रहा, I'll give it to this agent and उसको deal करने दो, कोई दिक्कत होगी तो मैं इसको पकड़ लूँगा. So that is the kind of equation which is now changing. Nobody had gone to China when the goods were coming in from there in the last 2 years. But we were trusting those metal agents. And money was going in billions of dollars. Everybody had placed the orders. Nobody had gone there to buy machinery in these 2 years. But everybody is working on trust. Now, where do we generate this trust? The trust comes when there is somebody who's validating that this supplier is all right. If, God forbid, this equation of COVID comes in, 3rd, 4th, 5th or 6th wave, and we don't know. So the idea is digitization in this industry has to happen. It may not happen 100%, but it is like we have to start moving into that direction, where the confidence gets generated, where the materials can be seen, where the information of the materials is readily available. All you have to see is whether I want to go with supplier 1, 2, 3, depending upon my comfort of payments, depending on the comfort of the ratings or the reviews coming in. So that's where I thought it adds to it.
But Sonal, one important point is there, like as a marketplace, how would you assure your buyer? Of course, you're not taking up the orders, right? It's not a place where you'll put somebody, you'll accept the money and then you'll show. So it's a kind of a matchmaking kind of a platform. But is there any way you also ensure that the supplier at the back end who is, exhibiting at your platform or who is ultimately going to get benefit, is he assured? Is he validated? Is there some kind of verification model that you do?
So there are phases of how we evolved as a business. Okay. That if I see, make my trip 15 years back or 20 years back in 2000 when they started. So it was like putting the trick of showing the properties and taking a feedback from the customers. Ki you visited, how was the experience? So this is a model which has to evolve. And it cannot be just one company which can do it. It cannot be just one Sotex. It can be like hundreds of Sotex in that area. The idea is कि आपको वो चीज को start evolve करना शुरू करना. Once that start happening, once there are 50, 500 or 5,000 reviews, there is a confidence that start building up. यार ये property है, ये brand है तो ठीक ही होगा. So that's where we have to start doing it. Yes, as a business model, what we do is we do all our initial checks. Any person who is coming into our platform, we do an initial validation. So there is a first level of KYC. When he becomes a member, there is a second level of KYC where we understand his business, where we understand his infrastructure, his USPs, certifications. And when we are publishing it on the platform, we're telling him that this is the initial level. When the business happens, we take the testimonials from the buyers. We send them the feedback forms. It may happen in 5 days, it may happen in 50 days. Because samples exchange हो रहे हैं, order अभी हो रहा है या 2 महीने बाद हो रहा है, 3 महीने हो रहा है. Once the order happens and the customer is satisfied, the supplier gets the feedback, that's when we start upgrading him. So that's an ecosystem which has to come into being. It cannot be something which can happen overnight, but yes, that's the direction we are following, and we are making sure that in the current phase we are more on the discovery side. Yep. But yes, down the line we will come in a phase where we will not only facilitate, but we also help them to close the transactions. Okay. On this model.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. So coming back to you, Sandeep. So we discussed like there are 3 basic fundamental factors why any buyer would place an order with a factory, right? So there are 3 things. Of course, there could be numerous, but 3 pillars would be, first of all, the price should be right, or let's say talk about the cost competitiveness. Second is the scale should be large enough as per buyer requirement. It could be small, it could be large, but it should match with the buyer's expectation. And third is value-added services, right? It could be design orientation, it could be logistics management, it could be anything, or even good communication also, or prompt communication could also be there. So now I believe that information technology, we call it technology, but it basically is information technology. These days, anybody who thinks of technology, it says information technology. Of course, machineries are also technology, but we are not talking about that. So how do you see that information technology, whether through your platform or any other matter, how these 3 things in terms of cost competence, you have talked about it, that it is so inexpensive that with minimum investment you can do, but what could be the gains out of it, right? So that's my first question. That's on the cost aspect side. Second is on service. One new area of importance which arises is traceability. Is there a kind of a solution for companies to improve their traceability across the supply chain using some of the digital tools, some of the information technology tools which are there? So if you can shed some light on that.
So thanks a lot. I mean, from when I look at it, right? So when we talk about the cost, So whether it's the cost or whether it's the time at which it has to be serviced, we all know that this industry faces what we call as the twin squeeze, the timeline squeeze and the cost squeeze. So there is a deflationary nature in general. The costs, there is a pressure that the costs have to go down rather. So at least they cannot increase. Or if they increase, they have to be very marginal, very strong. Lobbying basically happens industry-wide and all those things happen. The timeline squeeze is something which is pretty much now is a fact of life. More we see all the trends like e-commerce and everything, it is only increasing the velocity at which the industry functions. And this is one giant wheel, it has to move faster and faster. But the input costs are not something that are continuously reducing. So how do we bridge the gap? How will any industry bridge the gap? The only way is that you have to first get rid of all the costs which are not part of the direct business, right? So which is the non-productive aspects of it. What are the various inefficiencies which are there in the system? Now, the only reason why the industry is able to demand lower cost is because someone is able to provide that. And if someone is able to provide that, it is primarily because they are able to get rid of some of those inefficiencies and they are able to still remain competitive at those kind of prices. So the inefficiencies are there in the system. We all are aware of it. It could be the idle capacity. It could be various other sort of losses which are happening, which are not productive. So the first and foremost requirement is that you cannot fight this mega trend. The only way is that how do you cater to that, how do you stay relevant in that particular mega trend is by ensuring that you are able to identify all those inefficiencies. And those inefficiencies, we know as the current system exists, it is difficult to find those. So there has to be new methods to do that. And again, that comes in where the data becomes relevant. When you start becoming data driven, you are able to identify all those inefficiencies. Once they are removed, automatically the benefit comes out. So that is sort of one aspect that I would look at. And hence the decision to make investments are not necessarily only externally driven. It does not have to be that the decisions that have to be made in terms of technology, and technology, absolutely I agree with you, information is an integral part of it. It could be a smart machine also. But the reason one would make a decision is that, okay, what is my ROI? And the ROI has to come beyond what is the current business dynamic. It is essentially what additional efficiency I'm able to drive out of it, right? Sorry, what was the second one?
So I was talking about the service traceability aspect of it.
Sure. So I think traceability is again sort of nothing but one of the sort of the trends which continue, right? And one thing which probably I would also just add on to the previous conversation that was happening. I probably have a little aversion to the word disruption. I don't necessarily think that there is much of a disruption that we are talking about. What we are talking about is the industry remains what it is. We are not talking about a new business model over here. All the actors pretty much remain the same. Only thing is we are talking about what all those inefficiencies are. Some of them, for example, are the third-party providers, which are there purely for the traceability aspect of it. They are essentially just taking information from one point and taking to another point. The data is again the answer to that. The traceability is a requirement. Traceability is not going to go away. The only reason why we didn't have traceability is purely because of the opaqueness, because it was dark. You did not know. And sometimes you did not want to know, right? So both were the aspects. What you did not want to know is something that is going away because of regulatory pressures, because of various other pressures which are coming out. What you wanted to know but you could not know was because of lack of data and lack of information. As the pressure comes in, every single member of this chain, every single link has to integrate themselves with the ones behind them and in front of them, so that traceability is the natural outcome of that.
So actually just to add to this, like traceability, the importance of traceability is growing every single passing day. So if you visit the website of VF Corp, it's one of the biggest brands out there in fashion retail segment. So if you visit their website, so they have a special web page dedicated to the supply chain mapping. So they have identified, I think, top 20 best-selling products of their, let's say, khakis or chino pant. So if any consumer clicks that, and puts up the barcode number of that product, so he'll be able to understand the complete supply chain. So they will tell, first of all, which garment company has cut and sew the product, from where the fabric has been dyed and coming, which were the suppliers of button, and they go back till the farm level, so from where the cotton is coming. So that kind of initiatives the retailers are taking, this is definitely a larger retailer from US. Maybe we are still few years away, but it is only few. It is not in double digits. That Indian retailers would also start, doing as a kind of a pressure, peer pressure, or let's say a voluntary disclosure, etc. So traceability is getting important by every single passing day. Even the concepts of blockchain technology has come up, where you can map even to this which 1 kg of fiber has come from which place, and everything from that onwards we can do that. So traceability is going to be another thing. But again, the point is that the adopters of this technology necessarily are not the larger companies, right? So this is what your model as a business model, and even your model also, you are more geared towards towards catering to the medium segment, or let's say small segment of the industry.
80% of the business.
Yeah, exactly. But why do you think that in terms of your material supply chain, etc., what are the typical problems, compared to a larger company, a smaller company may face? They would have lesser bargaining power. What is the concept in terms of material sourcing? How are you catering to their requirements? I'll ask the same question to you also.
So one of the major problems for a SME in this segment is because for him to grow and increase his top line or increase his bottom line in terms of profitability, everything is dependent upon how efficient his delivery system is. Now, the delivery system is all dependent not only purely internally, but also dependent largely from the external sources. Again, as I said in my slide, if I were to pick up a traditional garment manufacturer, he's combining at least anything between 14 to 18 components from outside vendors and assembling it together to cut, sew, and to make a finished goods. Now, for him, he's totally dependent on external wear. His efficiency in the model is dependent towards the external side. So if there is a way that would be, as I said, would be working on this, if the efficiency in the model can be achieved by giving him the right information at the SME level as to where the fabric is coming from, how worthy it is. If you were to switch, अगर कल को उसको बोला कि मुझे कॉटन की जगह पॉलिएस्टर चाहिए, पॉलिएस्टर में भी पीसी का कपड़ा चाहिए और उसमें भी ग्रेड चाहिए, where is he going to go and find that fabric? He cannot come to these kind of exhibitions on a regular basis to find where the vendors are. And he cannot go to each and every stall to find out. So ये वाली जो discovery है, this is something which is an important need of the hour. It actually improves his efficiency to source and deliver the things faster. The more delivery system that comes to him, the better it is for him to get the repeated orders and increase his top line as well as his bottom line. So my thought process and my belief is the fact that there is enough in terms of an area that we are doing it. Of course, the top guys are the ones jinki puri ki puri sourcing chain integrated hoti hai. They know who are the right vendors because they're buying in huge quantities. Anything from 10,000 meters or 20,000 meters to about lakh of meters. So they know which mill they have to order. Because of sourcing, there have a lot of teams. But for the SME, he is the single man show. He's taking the order also, he's making the procurement also, he's managing his production also. And if there is any goof up in the entire thing, he's the one who's getting the burnt. And that's where the erosion of the business is coming in. So if the second generation or the third generation has to come back, he does not want to see all these problems. They want to work on a Zomato or a Uber or a Make My Trip. Sir, यहाँ पे मेरे को देखा था, यहाँ देखा, Google ने बताया, and I am done. Because that's how these people are growing up with. So information is becoming important, and the information has to come to our ecosystem also.
Correct.
It should not be that everything else will do and our system will not change. Yes, sir.
Firstly, thank you both for your presentations. It's very informative. My question to you is comes from an engineer's point of view, right? So being an engineering student, data collection can be quite jargonic, right? It can be very difficult to understand for most people. So when you provide insights to business owners, what kind of analytics do you do, and over what time scale are you able to provide efficient insights consistently?
I think it will be more relevant for you.
So I think thanks a lot for that question. I think this is one of the critical aspects when we talk about the, let's say, smart factory, industry 4.0, use of data, because the sort of the traditional mindset goes that we are talking about data mining. We are talking about collecting whatever is happening, all kind of data, and then trying to figure out, okay, what insights can come out of it, and is there some magic that will happen on that? I think the world has moved a lot from there. The world has moved from data mining to what we call as the process mining. What you are looking for is, okay, what are the processes that are my business processes? What is it that I do? What are the decisions that I make? How do I make those decisions? What is the information that I need to make those decisions? And I collect data that is only relevant for that. So there is no random data that is being collected. There is no need to collect any data that is not directly usable for a decision that has to be made. So it's essentially process-wise. And hence, when we talk about Industry 4.0, it cannot be one size fit all. You cannot just buy a solution off the shelf and say it applies on my industry. It has to be designed something that suits this particular industry, because, and even within the industry, there could be multiple fragments of it. Each part of the value chain will have a lot of those nuances. Unless and until the data acquisition is absolutely in sync with what is the business process at that particular part of the value chain, and then that is being converted into those insights which are directly relevant for my decision. So what you are doing is not creating some new insights. What you're doing is that whatever decisions you make, the challenge that you had about getting the right inputs to be able to make that decision, that part has to be automated. And that is where the smart factory comes in. Once you have mastered that, the first layer, then comes the second layer. Okay, now which of those decisions are something I can actually push into full automation or semi-automation? Because a lot of those decisions are almost formula based. The input comes in, I exactly know what I will give as an answer based on what input comes to me. A, B, C, D, E, this is what my response is going to be. These are things which can then be converted into semi-automatic or automatic decision. But not everything can be. There are a lot of critical decisions for which information is required. So rather than waiting for that information, you should be able to have that. So that is how I would like to think about it, that data should not be random. Data has to be absolutely linked with the processes.
So just to add up to what Sandeep has just mentioned, it is not just the data, and then it is how the data is architected. When we come to the solutioning part of it, जैसे हम लोगों ने, in our chemistry or in the maths or in the physics, what we see is that every problem can have a different ways of looking at the solution. आपका outcome same होगा, but it's just that same equation you're solving with a different ways of doing it. So this is the same thing when you are architecting the data also. When we are just collecting the data, it is just one part of the centric model. It's like going to a display stall downstairs and asking him, "कि आप क्या करते हो?" And he will give you different things. But what you don't know is what are his actual capabilities, because you have not gone and seen his factory. You have not seen whether the product which is there displayed downstairs is actually coming from his own unit or a unit under his cluster. उसका neighborhood का है, उसका रिश्तेदार का है, किसका है वो? You are just believing it. So it is the same way that you are taking the data from the product side or the factory side. But that's one side of data. The second is the validation process, where the validation comes from the supplier and a buyer, whether what he's saying is right or not. So it's like you are working in evolving the data. You cannot go to everybody's factory, you cannot see every single supply chain, and you can see whether it is robust or not. So it is an architecture that you have to create in such a manner that the validation down the line, maybe after certain times, actually throws you the right thing. So once you open up and in the early days, what you see on Make My Trip is like hotels ki pictures se bahut achhi hai, but when you actually enter the hotel, you don't get the same quality. It's because that data was not validated by anyone. Now when you go to the hotel and you see there is a 5-star rating and there are comments coming in, now you know that actually if the person has been there and he is experiencing whether there is a negative comment or not. So this is now happening across industries. It's not, I'm just giving you Make My Trip example because that's Indian based. If you see the same set of data churning is happening across various industries itself. And that's what the validation is required in our industry also.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So if there is any other question, we can have one quick question. Yeah, please. Because we are already, yeah, sure. We'll keep it brief. So we are already over. Yeah.
It's actually an observation to your point you made about traceability, right? Yeah. Look, VF Corp is a massive organization.
Of course,
as we all know.
I mentioned that.
And this might be, I mean, just a contrarian view is that this might be something which is like corporate mandate, right? I mean, are we feeding the customer, are we feeding the end consumer too much information, right? I mean, do they really need to know the button supplier or not? Or is it really done, from the point of view of the company? Are they doing it to check the box in a certain corporate mandate? So it's just a view.
No, I agree with you. Yesterday only we talked about the audit fatigue. Every single person is doing this. So I really appreciate that you're coming from that. That's a problem also. Sometimes you're doing things just for the sake of it. As I said, that peer pressure is one thing which is making other brands follow the suit. And since compliance, so what will happen is that anybody in home textile will say, okay, IKEA is the gold standard. You become IWA compliant, I'll also take. They have not gone into that. So I really agree with the point you are saying, but that is the truth of the matter, that whatever buyer is saying, ultimately the vendor has to comply with it. Sometimes it's an eyewash. Sometimes they also find a sideway or a bypass to do that. But that is the truth of the matter. Sure.
I mean, it's the same concept as audit fatigue.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you. Anything else? Any other question? Or maybe we can wrap up the session now. We have already crossed our 1 hour mark. Thank you so much for listening to us patiently and contributing to the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
It has been more than 1.5 hours around that, and it was very enlightening in this thing. So my request is, thank you, Ms. Naveen Senani sir, our chairman, Fair Committee, to give a memento as a thanks to our panelists, Mr. Sandeep Raghuvanshi. Mr. Ankur Gadia, CMA Treasurer, to please give a memento to Mr. Sonil Jain. And I would request Mr. Vivek Madnani as CMA in this thing, and Prakash Parekh to please come and give the memento to Mr. Varun Vaid for his moderating. It was a fine job, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all the audience for listening to this very patiently. I know it ran over a time, but it was a very in-depth discussion that happened. Please, I think we should give them a round of applause.